Habete amici, welcome back to the channel, or if you're new here, hi. My name is Sabrina and I am going into my second year of studying classics at the University of Oxford. So if you're a massive classics nerd like me, or maybe someone who's potentially interested in applying for classics at Oxford, which some of you may well be considering that you have actually clicked on this video, or if you're just someone who's potentially interested in my uni lifestyle in general, feel free to hit the subscribe button down below and join me on my university journey. This week's video, as you can probably gather from the title, is going to be focusing on personal statements, how to write a good one when applying for a top Russell Group university, but in particular, how to write a good classics personal statement when applying for a top Russell Group university, and even more specifically, how to write a good classics personal statement when you're applying for Oxbridge. I was inspired to make this video because a couple of you guys have been messaging me on Instagram asking me for my top tips and my advice as to how to get started when writing a personal statement for the first time. So I thought I might as well just come on here and summarise all my thoughts in one place so that not only you guys this year can use this as a useful resource for your application process, but also that future years can use it too as a free resource on the internet. And I guess this also means that we have reached the point in the year where application season is starting again, and that's super exciting but also crazy. I cannot believe how quickly the time has gone. It's been 2 years since I applied for university. That's absolutely insane. I actually can't wrap my head around it. But anyway, without further ado, ignore my rambling and let's get started. Now, the first thing to really note about writing a competitive personal statement aimed at top Russell Group universities, and in particular Oxbridge, is that they really do expect that your personal statements are made to be very, very academic and heavily focused on your supercurricular activities over your extracurricular ones. Now, supercurricular is an umbrella term that refers to everything to do with your subject that you've done outside of what you've learned about in school. So that could include extra books that you may have read, podcasts you've listened to, documentaries you've watched, study days you've gone on, summer schools you've gone on. Even if they're virtual, they still count. Anything to show that you have a deep interest in your subject outside of school that makes you want to take it up to a higher level at university. Extracurricular, on the other hand, is a term that refers to everything that you do outside of your studies. So that could be sports that you play, clubs that you've joined, hobbies that you have, and these are really important for showing that you are a multifaceted, well-rounded person that the university could really benefit from having in their midst. But most top universities, as terrible as it sounds, really don't care that much about your extracurricular activities and your life outside of academia. So I would probably say it would be wise to think about writing your personal statement in terms of ratios, so that maybe you spend 80% of it on your supercurricular activities and things to do with your subject, and 20% of it on your life outside of academia and things that you do for fun, or things to show that you're a well-rounded person and a good member of society. Alternatively, you could also do 70 and 30%. It really depends on you as a person and what you really want to put emphasis on in your personal statement. But overall, extracurricular activities really do need to take a back seat if you want to make a competitive application to a top academic university. I think the last point is particularly important in relation to the fact that you only have a really limited amount of characters when you're writing your personal statement. I think it's probably something like 4,000. That's really not a lot. You may think it is before you've started writing, but it really isn't. I think it works out to roughly around 600, 700 words, maybe a bit less than that, I'm not entirely sure. You really need to be quite picky about what you include and what you don't. Okay, so with that now out of the way, I'm going to move on to talk step by step through the process of how I started writing my personal statement and how you can too, and in particular advice about how you're going to structure a classics personal statement, because I think that can be a little bit tricky if you don't really know where to start. Classics is such a beautifully wide-ranging subject that I think sometimes you can get lost in the midst of it if you haven't really thought about it that clearly. So hopefully this is going to be useful to you, especially if you are applying for straight classics. So ironically, the first stage of writing your personal statement is actually not writing it at all. It's the prep stage, and it's probably the most important part of the whole process, because if you haven't done enough prep, you are going to find yourself in a very difficult situation. That I promise you. I would really recommend spending some time here to make sure that you've got everything solid before you actually start trying to write your first draft. So have you read enough books? Have you watched enough documentaries? Have you developed enough opinions that you could write about in that personal statement? So the first thing that I did when I went about planning my personal statement, and I would recommend that you do this too, is that I wrote a whole long list of everything that I'd done over the course of the year that I could potentially include in it. So both the supercurricular stuff and the extracurricular stuff, but mainly the academic things that I've been doing. I personally found it very useful for me to see exactly what what I had done over the course of the year and to jog my memory about what I had done, but also to see if there were any gaps that I needed to fill in with some more research. So if I hadn't looked into a topic enough, if I needed to read some more books or listen to another podcast about it. So it's mainly for you to just remember exactly what you have achieved and what you could potentially include in your personal statement. But the next stage is actually way more important, and that next stage is to collate together all of the notes that you may have taken over the course of the year to do with your supercurricular activities. If you've read a book, for example, any notes you may have taken to do with your thoughts about that book, about particular issues that you may want to revisit and talk about again, your own opinions on that book, about the arguments within it, anything that was particularly interesting to you or controversial maybe that you could offer your own opinion about. Oxbridge isn't necessarily interested in a long list of everything that you've ever done ever, but more about the quality over the quantity and your analytical thinking. So they care more about your own personal opinions than they do about if you've listed 50 books that you've read over the course of the year. They want to know what you've done with the information that you've taken in, how you've interpreted it, how you've worked with it to come up with your own opinions about things, and showing that you actually do have the skill set that is necessary to perform well at university. If you've been sitting here panicking whilst I've been speaking, thinking like, oh my god, I don't have any notes about anything that I've done over the course of this year, I have nothing to show for it, I would highly recommend that you go back and revisit some of the things that you put on those lists, and actually this time try and actively engage with what you're reading or watching or listening to. I mean, hopefully it'll be beneficial anyway, because you'll be revisiting a text, you might have new ideas about something, but what you really want to be doing is taking notes and applying your brain to thinking about what you're actually taking in. So if there's a controversial opinion, do you agree with that opinion? Do you agree with this historian about this take? But if someone else says something different, why are they wrong, or why are they more convincing? What is your personal opinion on different issues? What is something that's particularly interesting to you? That's another option as well. You can talk about things that you're really, really interested in and why you're interested in them. By the end of it, you really want to come out with something like this. And these are my notes from 2 years ago. Wow, 2 years ago. So here I have my notes about Livia and her power and her political persona, and this was inspired by me reading Tom Holland's Dynasty book, because I was really interested in the interpersonal relationships within the politics of the Roman Republic, the early Roman Republic, no, not Republic, Empire, early Roman Empire. So here we have some notes that I've just taken about different things that I thought were particularly interesting within that book, but also I've looked at some different sources to do with Livia as well after I read that Tom Holland book, to see if different interpretations matched up or not, and which ones that I found the most convincing. So these are the sort of notes that you really want to be taking, actively engaging with whatever you're taking in, so that you have something to talk about when you're actually writing your personal statement. So say you've done all of the above, you've collated all your notes together, you have enough notes collated together, you've now potentially got a few areas of interest that you might want to discuss or mention in your personal statement and analyse them in further detail. This is the fun part, because this is where you can start to mind map how everything might fit together in a way that makes sense. Because classics is such a wide-ranging subject, you really want to show the admissions officer that you are interested in classics and all the different disciplines that it potentially holds. What this means for you is that you could potentially use these disciplines as your structure for when you're writing your personal statement. So I would advise you pick your top 3 favourite disciplines within classics. So for me, that was languages, literature and ancient history, and structure a paragraph around each one for your personal statement, and hopefully your supercurriculars should back these up, considering that these are the areas that you're more interested in. That being said, I would strongly advise you that if you are applying for straight classics like I did for university, that you pick at least one of your paragraphs to be about the languages, their importance, your passion for them, or if you haven't done them before, your interest in learning them, because I think otherwise the admissions officers are going to be slightly confused as to why you're applying for classics if you're not really interested in the languages, or at least see their relevance to the subject, especially for Oxbridge. Oxbridge courses tend to be extremely language heavy, so you're going to be constantly translating in and out of ancient languages, and if you're not interested in the languages and that comes through in your personal statement, they might not think you're necessarily the best fit for the course. Although you will all still be taking a language entrance test, but I say I would still include a paragraph to do with languages and why you like them and why you want to study them, just to be on the safe side. So for example, in my first paragraph in my personal statement, I was discussing the importance of learning ancient languages through the problems of translation, and I linked that to a study day that I went to back in year 12 in Cambridge, where a man was talking about translating Homeric colour and the problems and ambiguities that comes with trying to translate Homeric colour into English, and what this can mean for the races of characters. So for example, Achilles could be black potentially. So for me at that stage, I knew that I wanted wanted to discuss the importance of languages in some way, I wanted to discuss mythology in some way, and I also wanted to discuss the roles of women in Roman society in some way. And what ended up happening is that they sort of neatly fitted it into 3 different sections. So my first paragraph was about languages, second paragraph was about literature, so mainly to do with mythology, but then also my third paragraph had a link into the second paragraph with some ancient history mixed in with the Vestal Virgins, which I'll go on to talk about a bit later. But the third paragraph was focusing mainly on ancient history and social history, so the importance of women. Furthermore, I would really recommend that you also include some form of material culture analysis in your personal statement. So that could simply be you writing about an idea that you find really interesting in several different books that you've read, and then using a statue, an ancient statue for example, to back it up. So I could be writing in my personal statement about the importance of Livia, Emperor Augustus's wife, her political position from what I've read about in different books, but then see if that actually translates to her presentation on an ancient statue. And then that's a way that you can show that you have wide-ranging analytical skills, and Oxford and Cambridge I think will be really impressed with that. In terms of linking together loads of different books and resources that you've used over the course of the year to show your wide breadth of knowledge and interest in your subject but still remaining analytical, I would really recommend that you try and think of a common theme that may run through all of them that you could use to analyse them all together to show your analytical thinking, rather than it being some long list of everything that you've done. So for me, for example, I read a lot of epic and mythology before, and at some point I realised that a common thread that ran through all of the things that I'd read, so that was like the Aeneid, the Argonautica, Plato's Symposium, was that at some point they all mentioned Cupid or Eros, the god of love. So I decided that maybe I'll try and see if I can analyse the different approaches that different authors took to depicting this god and what that could potentially tell us about their own beliefs or their own interpretations of what love is. I ended up coming to the conclusion that whilst most of the authors weren't necessarily exactly the same in their depiction and characterisation of the god of love himself, most of them did tend to agree on the idea that love brings dangerous and destructive force upon the world around it. So therefore, because I came to this analytical conclusion, I was able to link my EPQ into my personal statement, because my EPQ focused on the importance of women in religion in Rome, and then within that there was a big emphasis on the Vestal Virgins. Now the Vestal Virgins were virgin priestesses of Rome who were directly tied to the fate of the city and the empire. If any of them were ever to have any sexual relations with anyone, it was said that that would bring down the downfall of Rome and make Vesta's fire go out. So I kind of linked the idea of the Vestal Virgins and their destructive power with virginity and sexual activity, and I linked it to the different depictions of love as destructive. I then used the aspect of the political power of the Vestal Virgins to transition into my third and final paragraph, and this was mainly focusing on the political power of individual women like Livia, Empress Livia to Augustus, and her own individual influence on the politics around her. Here I linked in my reading about her that I'd done from Tom Holland's Dynasty, and also a documentary that I'd watched, and then I also linked in a statue of her and her son Tiberius, and I went about attempting to try and analyse the portrayal of that statue and what it suggested about Livia as an individual versus what we know about her from historical accounts and from historical sources, and to see if the two matched up or if she portrayed herself in a different way in public versus in private. Then I had a very minute paragraph which was focusing mainly on the extracurricular stuff that I did outside of school. So for me that was hockey mainly, and Gold Duke of Edinburgh, and volunteering in a charity shop. But like I said before, the main focus of the personal statement, if you're applying for a top UK university, and in particular Oxbridge, should be your academics. So this should be a very relatively small section, and I think even in this section I brought in something about listening to classics podcasts, and in the final little tiny paragraph at the end I made one more mention of a book. I think I mentioned Confronting the Classics by Mary Beard, and I kind of summarised my thoughts about why I wanted to study classics and where I saw classics going in the future. So it's really good to end your personal statement on a positive note and showing that you're looking towards the future, that you're excited to study your subject and why you're excited to study your subject, if you can summarise, and hopefully, fingers crossed, that kind of structure with 3 main disciplines, a small paragraph about extracurricular activities, and a final mini paragraph about why you want to study classics summed up will get you in the door. That's how I try to link my personal statement together. I know that came across as super rambly and long-winded, but hopefully you kind of got something of use out of that anyway. I guess the main point of it is to say that you need to try and find common threads through all of your research or your supercurricular activities, common themes that you could potentially use to link everything all together in a way that makes cohesive sense. So if you're reading loads of mythology, maybe focus on the depiction of one specific god through different books and see how it changes, and that could be your analysis. Or if you're doing ancient history, maybe focusing on a specific individual, seeing how historians' opinions about them have changed, or different people's opinions on them and why there's controversy surrounding them and what you think. It's all about trying to find ways to bring in your analytical thinking, as well as showing off that you are well read and that you have studied a wide-ranging amount of sources. That way you can tie everything together, show your critical analysis thinking and also your enthusiasm for your subject. At the end of the day, your personal statement for a top UK university, Oxbridge in particular, should really kind of be a love letter to your subject and prove that you really do want to study it, because it's going to be intense, especially if you're applying for Oxbridge. You need to be aware that you're studying a subject is going to be an intense experience. So if you're not fully into it, maybe it's a sign that it's not necessarily the right subject for you. But hopefully if you do love your subject and you do love classics, supercurricular activities and things won't be so much as a slog as, say, for example, me going to do some research about economics. So you've gathered your notes, you've started planning out how things might fit together, you've started mind mapping different links into different subjects and different books together, but now you need to start taking that final big step, which is actually writing your first draft, and it is going to be horrible. I'm not going to lie to you, I found it really tough, I found it very difficult. I think overall it took me 4 drafts of my personal statement to get it done. The first 2 were where the main big changes were happening, and then the final 2 were kind of like sort of nitpicking and making sure everything fit in the character count. But the first draft is tough, and so don't be too hard on yourself. What I will say is don't stress too much about trying to write this first killer sentence. Honestly, it does not matter as much as people say it does. Universities, admissions officers are way more interested in your overall interest in your subject and your analytical thinking, and they're not all going to get that straight away from the first sentence that you write to pique interest. It's really not that important overall. It should be the quality throughout that's more important than however great you are at grabbing the reader's attention in the first line. The thing to do is really just to word vomit onto a page and go from there. Once you've actually got something written down, that's when you can start changing it, that's when you can start editing it. It can be terrible, you can go through so many drafts, don't worry, you can go up to, I had 4, but I know people that had, I don't know, 18 drafts until they were something they were happy with. But as long as you get something written down, that is the main thing, and you will thank yourself for it if you start early. So some final tips about writing a classics personal statement in particular: try and include a range of different sources, so reading both ancient literature and more modern literature from historians or classicists. And finally, please write about what you're interested in. Don't try and figure out what the admissions officer wants to hear about, oh, I've read this Homer and I've read this Lucretius. No. Write about what you're interested in. If you're genuinely interested in Homer, go for it, write about Homer. But if you're interested in potentially something more niche, then don't be afraid to go after your interests and write about your interests, because I'm telling you now, the admissions officers have seen it all before. They've seen everything under the sun. They've seen all the same book titles all the time. So they're going to be way more interested in if you're actually true to yourself and if you're original in your own thoughts and in your own interests even. Of course we all love a bit of Homer, but maybe a different take on Homer, or a different focus on Homer, rather than just, oh, this is Odysseus' betrayal. So to quickly summarise, write a whole long list of everything that you've done over the course of the year that you could potentially mention in your personal statements, including supercurricular activities and extracurricular activities. But, you know, think about a ratio of 80 to 20% for supercurricular versus extracurricular. Collate all your notes together that you've created whilst you were taking part in these supercurricular activities, so you actually have stuff to write about when you're writing your personal statement, your analytical thinking, your analysis. Pick your top 3 favourite disciplines from classics. For example, it could be literature, languages and ancient history, but try and make one of them languages at least, because if you're applying for classics, you kind of want to convince the admissions officer that you do actually want to apply for classics and not just classical civilization. Mind map your notes together to try and find ways to link different things that you've done in a way that makes coherent sense, so that your structure flows very nicely. And once you have a rough mind map plan of how you're going to start writing your personal statement, write that first draft. Word vomit onto a page. Just do it. Just do it. It's going to be horrible, it's going to be painful, but just do it. You'll be fine. Once you've got that, that's when you can start making different drafts, editing it, making it better, cutting things out, putting stuff in. And the sooner you start, the better, because it is kind of a long process, and it is the beginning of August now, but time does fly and your deadline is in October, so good luck. You've got this. I believe in you. If you have any more questions, if you need any help or advice or tips so that you don't think I've really covered that well in this video, please feel free to message me on Instagram. The link will be in my bio down below. If you found this video useful, if you've enjoyed this video, let me know down below in the comments section. And if you've got any more advice to give to future applicants as well, also leave that down in the comment section below, and we can try and make this a useful resource for the years to come as well. So yeah, I hope you guys have a lovely rest of the week. I hope you have a lovely productive rest of the week, and I'll see you soon. Bye.